apologies for the delay. We wanted to make sure that interpretation was all set and ready, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So warm welcome to everyone. My name is Felix Giroux. I go by the pronouns he, him, and I'm really excited to be moderating this session with you and to get this started. So we'll try to finish this on time, even though we started a bit late, so we'll make sure to keep the conversation short and sweet and to the point. So just a brief introduction about myself. I'm a strong advocate for decolonizing climate policy and advocacy. I do this in my roles as a board member at Youth for Nature, as a delegate to different UN events, and of course, I'm still a student, so in all my class assignments and research. So it's my great pleasure to be the host of this conversation today, which is hosted by the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, the Office of the Independent Expert of Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, ILGA World, and the Global Queer Youth Network. For the next hour and a half, or next hour and 15 minutes, we'll be inviting different speakers to discuss the intersections between the habitat, peace building, climate, and LGBTIQ agendas, the challenges to acknowledge these intersections, and the mutual benefits of doing so. Like I said before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. We have simultaneous translation to French and Spanish. You can choose your preferred language by following the instructions on the chat. And I encourage also all speakers and people who will be speaking to use headphones that are with a cable. It's better for the sound quality for the interpreters. If you face any technical issues during the event, the Q&A option is always open and we should be able to help you there. And finally, for safeguarding reasons, all participants except for the speakers will have their cameras and audio options off. Great. So our first segment is named Towards an Intersectional Future, Achieving Agenda 2030, and we'll have a conversation with representatives from the UN Peace Building Support Office and Transform Education, a feminist coalition of youth-led networks and young activists with a shared mission to accelerate progress for gender equality in education, hosted by the UN Girls Education Initiative. So we'll reflect on the challenges and opportunities in working through an intersectional lens within their agendas. I also just want to briefly mention that we were supposed to have Ms. Archana Sorang from the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, but she can't be with us today, but I really encourage you to follow her work. She's doing incredible work. So before we start, we have a introductory video from Maimouna Maud Sharif, the Executive Director of UN Habitat, who will contribute to the dialogue with a reflection on the intersectionalities between the Habitat agenda and LGBTIQ youth.
Excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this session of Queer Youth Dialogues, focusing on exploring intersections between the climate, peace building, and LGBTQI youth movements. As we are on the doorstep of COP26, with many cities and countries of the world in conflict, there could be no better time to discuss these critical issues. Violations of the rights of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people undermine the shared international goal of gender equality. Addressing and ending such violations is part of the fulfillment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development's promise to leave no one and no place behind. UN Habitat integrates LGBTQI-related human rights concerns into all our programmatic work. For example, we work with our partners, Dialogo Diverso, a civil society youth NGO, and the city of Quito to educate the LGBTQ community on COVID-19 preventions through the painting of public service murals, a project that was honored as a runner-up for the Secretary General's Innovation Award. We seek to ensure intersectional representation of LGBTQI groups in all our work with government and civil society, in global meetings such as the World Urban Forum, and also in regional and country level meetings such as national urban forums. The LGBTQI community faces significant challenges when realizing their human rights and are often disproportionately impacted when in conflict contexts and by climate change. Their marginalization is greater when looking at intersecting forms of marginalization, hindering the full fulfillment of their human rights. Those who reside in urban informal settlements and slums, which currently over 1 billion people globally live within, face even further deprivation, lacking access to basic services such as water and sanitation, and inability to live in safe and affordable housing, and lacking access to education, decent jobs, and livelihoods. We urge states and cities worldwide to adopt inclusive municipal laws, policies, and services with comprehensive implementation measures to protect the rights of trans and gender diverse persons. This includes policies that help create safer cities free of violence and harassment against the LGBTQI community. As the Executive Director of UN Habitat, I will continue to support ongoing advocacy for an inclusive workplace free of stigma for all and overcome all hurdles specific to them. Human rights are universal and for all people everywhere. Let us continue to stand against homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. We are not all the same, but we are all equal. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think it's great and meaningful to hear leaders who can pinpoint to the difficult realities that LGBTIQ people face. And I appreciate the commitments to integrate those issues as part of broader development strategies. So moving on, I'll introduce the first segment of this event towards an intersectional future, achieving Agenda 2030. The UN Youth Strategy promotes young people's human rights as a priority, especially focusing on those experiencing intersecting forms of discrimination and abuse. It also acknowledges that in order to realize the Agenda 2030, an intersectional approach between movements is needed, building solidarity and complementary strategies together. To discuss how the implementation of these ideals go in practice, we'll now have two amazing speakers. I'll ask them to please introduce themselves and share their opening reflections on the topic. Oscar Fernandez Taranco, if you want to go first, the floor is yours. Sorry, we can't hear you. Hopefully it's not just...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. You can hear me. Okay, thank you. So let me start again. So thank you, Felix, again for the invitation to me, to PBSO, to be part of the Queer Youth Dialogue series. It's a big honor to be here today and to learn and to share with you some of our own work in this particular field. Let me introduce myself. I'm Oscar Fernandez Taranco. I'm from Argentina. I am a UN Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support. I lead the PBSO, the Peacebuilding Support Office, which is in the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. This is an office that was established in 2005 as part of the efforts to address this gaping lack of attention and support to peacebuilding efforts, to foster international support for these nationally owned and led peacebuilding efforts. So the office basically supports, provides secretariat to the Peacebuilding Commission, which is an intergovernmental body that deliberates on peace building strategies that governments share with the Commission, but also provides advice to the Security Council, ECOSOC, and the General Assembly. And we saw how this advice was quite crucial during the resolutions on youth peace and security several years ago. We also manage the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund that provides approximately between $160, $180 million worth of programming each year across some 40 countries to support peace, nationally led and owned peace building efforts. And we also promote system-wide coherence within the UN and, of course, support to the partnerships to build and sustain peace. So PBSO has been quite a long-term partner of youth since 2012. We have been advocating for the recognition of the very important role of young people in peace building. In 2014, you might recall, we launched the 9 guiding principles for youth participation in peace building. And one of those key principles was the third one, focusing on gender dynamics and noting especially the roles of transgender young people in peace building. Since the adoption of the 2250 resolution on youth, peace, and security, again, we've been helping bring the relevant partners together to collaborate more, to create tools, to create opportunities to accelerate the implementation of this agenda. The movement, as you were referring to initially within the UN, is very much supported by 3 Security Council resolutions, an independent progress report, and the first ever Secretary General report on this issue. So we have, for many years now, been supporting an active role of young people and youth-led organizations in peace processes and in peace-building initiatives through the Peace Building Fund. I'll stop here and see what type of questions you want me to be addressing. Thank you, Felix.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll go into much more details in the conversation right after. I'll give the floor to Shama Boulangis, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Felix. Hello, everybody. My name is Shama. My pronouns are she, they, sha. Sha is a gender-neutral pronoun in the Philippines, where I'm from. I'm here to represent Transform Education, which is an initiative hosted by UNGAI. We are a young feminist coalition working at the intersection of education and gender equality. And that's really like the main thing that we're doing. Locally in the Philippines, I've co-founded and co-directing the Visayas Lesbian, Bisexual, Trans, and Queer Network, working to address misogyny even within the LGBT community. Back to you, Felix. Very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us. So I'll start us off with a first little question. And so we all agree that an intersectional approach is needed in order to realize the SDGs. However, it can still not be clear how that comes across in different spaces. So maybe, Oscar, I'll start with you. If you could explain how the Peace Building Support Office understands intersectionality of different agendas of the Agenda 2030 within your work.
Okay, Felix, yeah, thank you. I mean, I think intersectionality actually defines very much the role and the existence of the PBSO team. Our mandate is really to support inclusivity and nationally led peace processes and peace programs and peace building efforts around the world. Basically, the starting point is that it's very hard to do peace building and sustaining peace where if we don't have the right conditions that actually address personal, social, and environmental well-being. We have seen, for example, how the violent conflicts have become much more complex, much more protracted, driven by multidimensional factors that interconnect, cascade, compound on each other, including, as we've seen with COVID, with climate inequalities, the exclusion, etc. So to achieve peace, we literally need to address the structural, the social, the cultural, the political, and the ecological violence that we are seeing manifest. The term of violence in this context was actually coined in this independent progress report on youth, peace, and security, where we were talking about the notion of the violence of exclusion. And it refers to this mechanism where young people experience when they face the psychological and structural exclusions and discriminations, be it on social, political, cultural, or economic undertakings. And so we see that the systematic marginalization or exclusion that young people of different backgrounds, and especially LGBTIQ youth, they are exposed to is what actually leads to the types of grievances, mistrust in governments, and many divisions within communities. We also know that at the heart of the 2030 agenda is this notion of inclusivity. It's the framework to actually eradicate poverty, to address discrimination, exclusion, reduce inequalities and vulnerabilities. And the promise is to leave no one behind. And this means all people from all walks of life, including young people with various fluid identities and intersectionality. So we think, that sustaining peace is impossible unless the young people are represented and have a voice and a role in the political life and the peace processes, and have a say in peace building, in state building, that they actually have a stake in deciding their own future, that we don't see young people as beneficiaries, but actually as drivers, as agents of change, of peace building, champions, if you will. So the peace building, therefore, all efforts actually will be in vain unless we're dealing with all these aspects in a comprehensive and in a coherent manner. I think the 2030 agenda actually provides the framework, and it basically recognizes, we cannot have sustainable development without peace, and we can't have peace without sustainable development. It is, if you will, a blueprint for joint action in areas for humanity and planet. And actually, it seeks to realize the human rights and balance, again, the economic, the social, political, environmental dimensions of sustaining peace. So I think, at the heart, the sustaining peace building agenda is mutually compatible, reinforcing with the 2030 agenda in addressing all these issues of intersectionalities. And I try to just address some of them in this response.
Right, absolutely. No, that's very important. And maybe Shama, I'll turn to you also with your understanding of intersectionality at Transform Education, but also maybe Oscar mentioned, when we address and integrate intersectionality, we have to address structural problems such as social, political, ecological. Maybe you could share some examples of specific initiatives you work on that does integrate intersectionality into how Transform Education understands the term, and what kinds of initiatives, how do we make this happen?
Thank you, Felix. When you try to ask someone to explain what intersectionality means for them, that's usually very difficult because it's a very loaded word, right? And the coined term intersectional feminism, for example, it already is understood differently by many types of people. And that's exactly because intersectionality is a complex term, and intersectionality is a complex strategy to be able to employ in any organization or in any life, right? In your life even. So for TE, for example, as I already said, we already work at the intersection of education and gender equality, and that's goal 4 and 5 of Agenda 2030, right, of the SDGs. But there's one specific thing that we really work on, and that's making sure that young people are included in agenda and the goals 4 and 5, specifically at that intersection. So right now we actually have, we're reorganizing, and in our reorganizing, we want to make sure that young people who are working on different intersections are included in our structure. We have working groups on SRGBV in schools, for example, right? That's working on sexual gender-based violence in schools. It's gender and climate. We work on gender at the intersection of gender and climate as well, making sure that education and climate education also understands that there's a feminist lens to it and there's a gender lens to climate, for example. We work on girls in girls' education in crisis areas. we're starting a working group on that because we understood that some of our members are working in crisis and conflict areas, and we wanted to create a sort of support group in a sense by creating a working group that allows them to create their own work plans for it. So all of these working groups, we allow young people to create their own work plan, and us in the executive positions in TE are basically just there for technical support and helping them strategize, etc., whatever is needed to put them together with each other. We understand intersection in a way that the solutions should be intersectional because our struggles are intersectional, right? The struggle for gender equality is not separate from the struggle for climate change, separate from the struggle of peace, separate from the struggle of LGBTQI rights, separate from the struggle of prosperity and economic mobility, right? And exactly this, it's exactly this that we want to work on intersection. When we divide ourselves, when we compete amongst each other, it only benefits the oppressors. It doesn't benefit us because we're fighting within amongst each other when we should be fighting upward, right? So there are many people that are working on different intersections, and we want to try to bring them all together. With that said, working on just the intersection of identities also has its many challenges because it's just identities, right? We have to look at it from a point of view of decolonization, as you have mentioned already, Felix. We have to point, and just to mention as well on decolonization, in many of our white friends who are in transform education, we always request them to do a land acknowledgement, especially if they're in a conquered land and an exploited land as well, just to make sure that we are also recognizing the many different facets of intersectionality, not just based on identity, but also on economic classes, for example. There are so many things that that are, as I said, intersectionality is a very loaded subject, which is why it's very important to really interrogate how we're doing intersectionality as well. And that's how Transform Education does intersectionality in the work that we do.
Great. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And myself reflecting on my work in climate advocacy, climate justice work, I mean, if we start from the point where the climate crisis is more of a symptom of greater structural processes, then instead of just the problem, the crisis, then we can see how addressing some more root issues can help in addressing, well, climate change, but also address different inequalities and inequities that we face. And I think it's really important for us, at least in the climate world, to recognize that we can and should address some deeper systemic issues and not just transition to all electric cars and technological solutions. And you know, the land acknowledgement, I come from Canada, I'm now in the UK, but the land back movement of giving back land to Indigenous peoples is extremely important in both addressing, of course, climate change, but healing and repairing the harms of the past and of the present. So I definitely recognize that. Oscar, I don't know if you wanted to share some specific examples, more concrete that you're working on around intersectionality, maybe one initiative that addresses directly the intersection between two issues. I mean, you mentioned many, but I'll leave the floor open to you.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. And yes, so I think it's true. This is a big challenge, right? And the issue here is to translate a lot of what we're talking about into direct support and action to make things, actionable change, so to speak. So I think, just to give an example, one of the ways that we believe we're contributing to this agenda of intersectionality, more integration of the different streams and actors and civil society organizations is through what we have. It's an annual gender and youth promotion initiative, which actually it's a call for proposals that we receive from across the world that are essentially focused in empowering women and young people through the Peace Building Fund. So every year we launch an appeal for specific ideas, and they are thematic in kind. For example, last year, in response to the Secretary General's call to action for human rights, we decided to focus if you will, the initiative on the promotion of human rights and the protection actually of young peace builders and human rights defenders. And we actually had a specific call for initiatives that would address protection and support of LGBTIQ youth initiatives. This is quite, I think, quite revolutionary in that a big part of this agenda requires the type of resources that allow us to go beyond the analysis and the description of all the things that need to happen with actual investment in these type of activities. So last year, for example, we approved some $9 million in 7 programs across countries like the DRC, El Salvador, Liberia, Honduras, Sri Lanka, Colombia, and Madagascar. And just to give you a sense of what these programs try to do, in Madagascar, it's about facilitating and promoting the engagement of young citizens, of students, of journalists, of civil society organizations as vectors of peace and promoters of human rights, and including actually elements of capacity building, of strengthening many of these organizations that are underfunded, of course, and many times not even supported, but to support the type of research and protection of these human rights defenders and LGBTIQ activists. In the DRC and the Kasais, we are promoting this peaceful coexistence between returnees and displaced persons and host communities, again, strengthening the protection of vulnerable groups, including women, girls, LGBTIQ, by again, improving things like access to legal aid and socioeconomic opportunities. In Colombia, we just approved a few weeks ago a sort of a re-strengthening of an ongoing program which actually seeks to enhance the influence of LGBTQI people, Afro-Colombian and indigenous women in decision-makings around territorial and national, how can I say, priorities of peace building and social cohesion initiatives in some of the worst affected areas of conflict. So this year in particular, the initiative has been focusing on promotion and protection of the civic spaces for young people, with special focus on environmental and land-related issues, and a specific, how can I say, window for indigenous people's rights. So what we have is an instrument, which is a peace building fund, which is a fast, flexible, catalytic instrument that is able, to address issues like hate speech, stereotyping, discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, promoting legal protection, promoting the human rights of all individuals and the participation in decision-making process. We believe that we are trying to, and with the collaboration of many of you present in this discussion, to actually bring this agenda, shine more light and more resources and my support to an agenda that is extremely important for the realization of rights for everyone.
Great. I'm going to move to a bit of a different question, and for the sake of time, maybe I'll separate the question. Maybe Shama, I'll start with you. You can answer the first part. As people, the three of us working, interacting in different ways with the international system, international structures, how, and I'm sure we all face frustrations, also many inspiring moments, I think, that come out of nowhere sometimes. I was wondering if, first of all, maybe Shama, you could share some of these frustrations / inspiring moments, and Oscar, I'll ask you, how is that international system, how can we have it to change for it to better integrate intersectionality in the future, presently? So yeah, I'll start with you, Shama. What kind of frustrations, what kind of challenges and inspiring moments you've faced with the international system?
Right. Sorry, before I answer that question, is it okay if I respond a little bit to Oscar's statement a while ago? You know, Oscar, what you mentioned really reminded me of the arms, the anti-basis movement here in the Philippines before. So the anti-basis movement was was working to to end the occupation of the U.S. bases here in Subic. I'm not quite familiar where else, sorry, but mainly in Subic and in Angeles. And one of their main partners was actually the feminist movement. And one of the ways that they won for a little bit of time actually was that they partner with the feminist movement, and the women's movement actually highlighted the stories of the many women surrounding the bases, right? And how the bases has contributed to this entertainment industry that exploits women and feminine bodies, and how there are so many women and feminine bodies that have died because of the violence that also emanates from the basis, right? And that was very successful during its time. It has dissipated a little bit now, but it reminds me of how important it reminds me again of how important intersectionality is, right? The LGBT movement is very successful exactly because we have many identities intersecting within the movement as well, right? The peace, LGBT, climate advocacy are all struggles for survival, right? We're all trying to live. Climate advocacy is all for trying to live. Peace is all about making sure that we have peace so that we can all live. And LGBT people are struggling for their right to live as themselves as well. And again, this is why intersectionality is very important. And when you're working on this at the local level, for example, queer young people are leading the charge against the reclamation in my city. We're fighting against the government and the local government unit to stop a reclamation area that will affect fisher folk, that will affect livelihood of many people, and we're trying to put their stories out there so that people will see, and it's becoming more and more mainstream. But put this on an international perspective, right? There are many struggles even within the local advocacy campaigns that we have. We experience tokenism, for example, young people being put out there saying, oh my God, yeah, you have to be there because we need a young person, we need a woman face to this, we need a fisher folk face to this. And we're really like pushing back against some of the, I wouldn't say older, but like probably older people who always say, okay, well, we need a young person to MC or moderate this so that it looks good, without asking us what we want for it to happen, you know, what we want the structure of the program to be, for example. And really, like, that's one of the main issues in the local level, and I'm pretty sure, and even at the highest levels, at the international levels, that's also a struggle, right? Young people being put at the table, but then what do we bring? We bring so much to the table, and then what happens? There's not that much accountability to the recommendations that we provide, right? Another issue is that whenever we work with coalitions, for example, another struggle is that there is there's a sort of siloing of the issues. So if we're working for climate advocacy, for example, and we want to put like a feminist perspective to this, we want to have trans people talk about their experiences in climate crisis, about how they're not necessarily receiving social amelioration programs, for example, if they're affected by a huge typhoon. You know, it usually doesn't get the mainstream or the main highlight because we're looking at climate advocacy, right? So there's a few identities that do get put in the background while we're working on intersectionality, and that's always the struggle, because we're working on intersectionality and it's very new. We're all practicing it, and along the way we are learning and unlearning. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it, as well as the challenge of it, that we're all trying to learn how this works. And I think what we need to do is just be honest with ourselves. What are the things that we don't know? What are the things that we know? And what are the things that we have to that we know that we have to unlearn?
Oscar, did you want to reply to that? And
No, yeah, well, no, thank you. No, this is a very, very engaging and excellent discussion. I think, so I think this is certainly a work in progress. And I think things are changing, but they are clearly not changing fast enough for all of us, at least, who are now involved in this discussion. Things could be moving faster, but I do think that in general, the international community seems to be moving increasingly to a more of a whole of system thinking. I think the 2030 agenda is a very important part of that framework, but just equally important is the sustaining peace framework that both the Security Council and the General Assembly adopted, which is basically this notion that we cannot obtain results if we continue to work in a siloed manner. I mean, if the development pillars of work of the UN are not interacting with the peace and security, are not interacting with the human rights, and are not interacting with the humanitarian response mechanisms, then we are actually adding to the problem rather than resolving. So intersectionality, coherence, breaking of the silos is extremely important. And I think certainly within the UN, with the reforms that the Secretary General has been launching, with some of the council resolutions and the work of the Peace Building Commission, I mean, slowly we are addressing issues that try to address intersectionality. I would say that the biggest challenge many times, and resources were mentioned, is that the way we program resources are not always to actually build and create intersectionality. Usually resources are very much siloed, are very much ring-fenced for very specific initiatives that don't always add up and not always being seen as part of a coherent whole. Which is why we and PBSO, and through the Peace Building Fund, we believe we are providing an incentive for that type of investment in local initiatives, in local analysis, in local coalitions and movements that try to address the interrelationship between peace processes, violence, the environmental impacts, COVID, the development exclusion, economic exclusion, inequalities, etc., addressing the grievances that come from marginalization, and investing in that is I think, is a huge value added of this very small instrument called the Peace Building Fund that should be operating at a much, much bigger scale. You know, I mentioned the 9 millions we just approved last year. We should be approving many more. The issue, of course, is one of resourcing, is one of how do we actually create the space where we can have this element of joint analysis, joint planning, but also joint implementation, joint programming, where we have alliances between the UN, with civil society, working at the central, regional, local levels with government, but also creating a space and initiatives that support the voice of civil society. And many of the young peace builders that we have increasingly gotten to know, so much so that because we've been able to meet and learn and understand what those demands coming from young peace builders, that we have opened the space, for example, in the Peace Building Commission to actually have briefers that actually brief on how they see the challenge of peace building in any particular country context that we are discussing. It's been hardly ever the case, at least in my experience, that we have had briefers who didn't know how to address some of the core challenges which have been already mentioned in this morning's discussion. So, you know, I know we're running out of time. To make a long story short, I think things are changing, that we are creating better partnerships, but clearly the space and the resourcing needs to be improved and increased and enhanced. And some of the instruments are there that we need to continue to build up. And I think these type of conversations, these type of discussions are hugely important for us to see where more do we need to be investing and supporting and creating space and partnerships, so that this is something that addresses head on much of the exclusion and discrimination that the LGBTIQ, you know, youth leaders and organizers and constituents face on a daily basis. I'll leave it at that, Felix.
Great.
I know you're running out of time, but if you want me to continue, I can. But
I think we could all continue. I mean, we're all very passionate about it, and it's central to our work. I think that's the key point, is we're not, you know, we might focus on a certain issue whether peace building, climate change, education, but we're doing this in a holistic manner, and that's what matters, is addressing broader structural changes, broader structural processes to ensure that the future that we aim to create is very different than the one we live in today. So, and I also really appreciate, a lot of us are grassroots organizers. We work at the local level. We also interact with the international level, and it's great to see this sure the bottom-up approach, but also the recognition at the highest level, for instance, of the UN, of yourself to want to bring more resources. Money matters and finance matters, and to co-create that these spaces as well, to make sure that the money goes in the hands of those that are most marginalized. I think it's important for the flow of money to directly impact those who need it most. So there needs to be this coordinated approach between the local grassroots and the highest levels of international systems. So I really appreciate that. We can have this conversation all together, from the grassroots to the UN. So I'll bring this to a close. Thank you so much for your insights and sharing all that. I really appreciated it. I hope that all the participants also appreciate it. And we will move on slowly to our next panelists. Great. So our second segment is called International Youth in Action, Climate, Habitat, and Peace Building, where we'll chat with young LGBTIQ people who are pushing for change in their local communities on such issues, about their experiences and the challenges of putting intersectionality into practice. I'll let the panelists be spotlighted so we can all see everyone, and give them a second to turn their cameras on as well. Great, I see them on my screen. Amazing. Great, so I'll let each one of you introduce yourselves. Gabby, we can start with you if you are ready.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me, Alex? Yeah, good. Hello, everyone. I'm Gabi Baessi. I'm from the northeast of Brazil, the land of the Potiguara people here. And I am a non-binary transgender person. I'm also the regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean at Youth for Nature. I also have been engaged in different topics such as education, LGBTQ+ movement, climate and nature agenda, as well as the habitat agenda. So intersection, it has been always part of my life and my what I have been doing. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today, being able to discuss a matter that is so important to me and actually so important to all the other agenda and topics that we are talking about.
Great, thank you, Gabby. It's great to have a fellow colleague here. Jorge, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jorge. I'm from Quito, Ecuador. I belong to a couple of activist groups. One is Yas Unidos, and the other one is Terra Canal, which is a group that we are forming. My experience in activism began like 10 years ago, specifically fighting for equal right to civic marriage for LGBTIQ the community here in Ecuador. And then I slowly enter into ecology activism, since it's as Shamala said before, it is very intertwined. So that's who I am. That's what we've been doing, and very happy to be here.
Happy to have you with us. Lamea, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm very much excited to have being a part of this amazing panel today. I am Lamia and I identify as a queer person and also I go by the pronoun she, they. I am the founder and CEO of the non-profit youth-led organization called Transcend. Through Transcend, we aim to bridge the gap between the mainstream community and the marginalized transgender community of Bangladesh through education, healthcare, training, employment, and entrepreneurship. So in our country, the transgender community is one of the very marginalized community. And as I say that the three pillar of the vision and mission of our country, it's actually all about intersectionality and empowerment. Thank you.
Great, thank you for being here. So it's so great to have this amazing panel. I'm really proud of being and having you here. And as we can see, many LGBTIQ people are and have been at the forefront as leaders of different movements, sometimes without acknowledging the impact of our own identity and sexuality to our activism and advocacy. As young LGBTIQ people actively advocating on different spaces, how is the agenda of your work informed by gender identity or sexual orientation discussions? We can start in the opposite order. So maybe Lamia, if you want to go first.
Yeah, all right. So as I said, I have this platform called Transcend, and through Transcend, we are basically a volunteer-run organization. In our country, like homosexuality is still illegal, and there's like the 377 penal code is still there in our country, and even the transgender people are very much at risk of lives here. So most of the queer organization, they work being underground. So Transcend is very much visible, and the reason why Transcend is visible because I believed in allyship. I believe that if we still just form queer group or like group of transgender people and being just us, we cannot change and reform the society. So I have always believed in my cishet allies, cishet friends, and there's a couple of cishet volunteers in our team. So this is how we are trying to bridge the gap between the transgender and the mainstream community. And in our country, like the transgender people, they got abandoned from their family, and like 97% of them, they are involved in sex working or begging, having no other options to get other for livelihood. So so through our platform, besides preaching for sensitization and transgender rights, and doing a lot of online social media campaigns, because we know that social media is an amazing form to run a movement, right? So this in our social media, we like preach the trans rights through articles, informative articles, videos, webinars, Facebook Lives, etc. And we launch training sessions, can be vocational and on different subjects. And later on, we try to scope job for this marginalized transgender community, not only transgender community, queer people as well. So this is how we this is the structure of our and like the main vision and mission of our organization. As I said that even there's a lot of homophobic and transphobic people in our country, Bangladesh, the young Gen Z people, the volunteer who are cishet still visibly advocating for queer and trans rights. I am very much proud of them, and I believe that when we have this, these allies, supporters from different part of the community, different part of the world, different part of the society, this is how we can hope to actually achieve our agenda, which is like finally break the stigmas around the transgender people and queer people and establishing transgender rights and queer rights. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I thank you so much. I think it's important to recognize that nothing can be done alone, and allyship is important to reach out to fellow movements and other people. Jorge, did you want to share some of your experiences in being in a movement and having whether you or not you've put your identity or sexual identity or gender forward, or if you've thought about it, or what kind of challenges you faced in that?
Thank you for that question. Well, at first I was very shy on actually coming out, to my activist group, which at first I was scared because I also come from a very close-minded homophobic community. Ecuador has a lot of stigma around the LGBTIQ community. So at first I was kind of scared, but then thankfully, because I came from a background of fighting for the right of LGBTIQ community to get married, that was a very easy way for me to enter into these activist groups, because I was like, I'm here because I've been fighting with my community, to access more rights, and I want to be part of also this community, because I do believe that a very revolutionary act we can have, maybe the most revolutionary act we can have, is defend our own diversity. To defend our own diversity right is to defend nature as it is, because we are basically as diverse as nature. So it was kind of hard at the beginning, but then I think I found a place where I felt very safe. As a matter of fact, when the Yas Unidos group, the group that I've been with for like 8 years now, we proposed a referendum to protect one of the most biodiverse areas in the world, the Yasuni National Park. And one of the most interesting experiences I had in this group was that once we presented the referendum, the citizens of Ecuador, and especially the government, they were like, okay, so what do you propose? And our answer was to create this manifesto that is called Plans from the A to the Z, so all the alphabet. And what people were expecting, they were expecting, us to write increased taxes, we're gonna do this and this. And what we talked about is to redevelop a new kind of relationship with nature. We started talking about the erotic with nature, the aesthetic of nature, because that's what's been happening from the last 500 years. For the last 500 years, the current capitalism socioeconomic system, what it has done, it has forced communities to accept extractivism and heteropatriarchy, making us think that the less we are, the less we appear, white, rich, straight men, our lives are less worthy. So in that sense, I repeat my initial statement: the most revolutionary act we can do to defend our diversity rights is to defend nature.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have such a it can help us rethink our relationship with our environment, with nature, who we are on this earth, and I think that's very valuable. Gabby, did you want to share some insights into that question, the first question I asked?
Yes, sure, Felix. One thing that I forgot to ask before, I want to know if we have other transgender, non-binary, queer people that don't identify with the gender they were assigning their birth here, because there's a big problem of underrepresentation of transgender people, and the violence. I think one important thing to acknowledge here is inside the LGBTQ+ acronym, we have two different segments. It's already an intersection acronym because we have the LGB that talks about sexuality, and the transgender, queer, two-spirit people and other type of identities. They are a gender identity, they are an identity. So the issues that, even though they have intersection between them, we have to acknowledge there are difference when we are talking about the experiences, because right now most countries, actually in 2019 was when the World Health Organization, the United Nations Organization, recognized that transgender people is not a disease. So when we're talking about advancing on these issues, we are talking that we are like in the basic. We still need a lot to develop on that, because right now we don't have even data about the transgender people that we have around the world, even in the organizations. What are the data that the United Nations have of transgender people inside of the organization? And so, and right now we don't have, we know that the average age of a transgender person, we don't have data about it, but generally in the United States or even in Brazil, it goes around 35 years old. So when we're addressing it, we have to talk about now how we can address these issues right now, because as a transgender people, I don't know how long I will live with the violence that we face around the world. So when we're talking about LGBTQ plus agenda in the climate and nature agenda, I think things have a lot to develop, because this is not addressed in most of the places. I haven't been seeing this intersection about it in a lot of space. And even when we are talking about the COP, the climate change conference that we have in a few days, in less than a month, there's still, this is not part of agenda, there is not part of the issue. Even when we're talking sometimes about the Commission on the Status of Women, as Gabi Muller was saying in the comments, how is still focusing on, when talking about gender, about the equity around women, but how we can stop developing it to talk about also the issues about transgender people that are also a gender identity that face a lot of problems. And there's a lot of connections actually between, I think Jorge already brought some interesting thoughts about how we are nature. People are nature. In the diversity that we think people have to be respected as the biodiversity that we have in nature. There is a topic of study called queer ecology that have been addressing the connections between queer theory and ecology. And there's a lot of connections between it. And I think one thing that we have to realize is that nature and also these groups that have been historically marginalized by this system, they are, nature and those groups have been exploited by those systems. They have been oppressed, and this is something that there's a lot of connection between them. And as people, we are part of nature, and our diversity have to be respected. Intersex people are a reality. So we have people that are born with not a specific gender. So actually this is a reality. So how we are assuring that those people are not facing violences, how we are thinking in policies about health and inside of the climate justice as well. So sorry for talking so long, but
no, it's so great to hear your thoughts and insights. I mean, just when organizing this event, we were reflecting on what would be, is there a specific angle to address, let's say, climate and gender and sexuality, and then there are just so many different layers that we can explore. There's the safety level, just on a very direct, more surface level. There's COP 26 happening in less than 2 weeks. But if I reflect on COP 24, which happened in Poland, I'm also Polish, and Poland has had these LGBTIQ free zones. I mean, would I have been comfortable going to Poland and advocate in the way I do today in Poland? Probably not. So there's just this safety level. Can we access these spaces of negotiating? And then there's a very deep spiritual level, like you all mentioned also, of queer ecology. How can we transform our understanding of nature, of how nature functions, exists, and through our own diverse identities. And I think that's very, very important to bring this broader cultural change. So yes, there's so many levels, I think, that intersect with climate and the environment. Maybe I'll move on to kind of some of the challenges that you faced in integrating intersectionality in your work, and also some of the solutions. I mean, you all mentioned a few of them, but if we look to the future, how can our movements, both in climate and LGBTIQ, can kind of intersect better also with other movements? If we think of Indigenous rights, the Black Lives Matter movement, how can we start building power in numbers together and sharing our different learnings, our different challenges and struggles? So it's a big loaded question. I'll give you time to each answer that, but some of the challenges and that you faced and that you used to reflect on, looking to the future, how can we best address this and work with different movements? Maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, all right. While answering the question, I mean, it will be like, the night will pass, but the answer on end, the amount of struggle and challenges I face every single day. I mean, in this country, Bangladesh, when we can use the word, LGBTQIA, people literally comes to, kill us and give us a lot of death threats. We get it every day in our DM, in Facebook and Instagram. So we had to use, the word SOGI, SOGI community, or like we cannot use any rainbow sign, things like that. So the people are a bit sensitive of the trans rights, but most of the Bangladeshi people, they are very, very homophobic. So, this is the number one thing. I will talk about three small points. Number one, would the taboo around the LGBTQIA community, and about the transgender community. Like most of the people, they in our country, like the cisgender people, they don't even know who are the transgender people, and that gender can be gender is an spectrum. It's social construct. In our country, in the school level, we are taught that gender is binary and things like that. So like people just don't have any idea about transgender, and they often get mixed up with transgender and intersex people, because in our country the local transgender people who are marginalized, they are known as hijra community. It's a very local term in the South Asia. So and then there's this conflict between the marginalized hijra community and the Gen Z privileged transgender community. Like like they don't want to get identified as hijra. Sometimes the privileged people think that this is a slur. Yeah, things like that. So many taboos. Number two is the lack of trans-friendly policies in our country. Do you know that in our country, Bangladesh, transgender are officially recognized as Bangladeshi citizen in 2019, just 2 years ago. So this is very, very frustrating. There is no proper infrastructure and policies on transgender people. We, the activists, keep talking about it, but like, in the government level, there is no steps taken. And as I said, the 377 is still here in our country. Number three would be, as I said, like earlier, the extremist people being non-development and like, Islamist people. There's a lot of religious extremist people, fundamentalist people in our country. Often they kill like atheists. They keep killing the LGBTQ people. And I think you have already heard in 2016 how two queer activists, Tanvir and Tonoy, was killed from Rubban in our country. It's very, very tragic. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I do keep talking about it through my platform. Still, I fear the life of the closeted transgender people who are volunteering for my organization. So it's it's all a very very frustrating time that we are passing in this country. And yeah, this the challenges are keep coming, but yet we are very much hopeful that someday it will change, and it will change through the new generation. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I think from what I'm hearing, it requires a lot of resilience that we wish we hadn't, we didn't need to put so much energy in just the day-to-day life that we have. That resilience could be used for something else, and a lot of that energy is spent there. Gabby, do you want to go next?
Yes, sure. Yeah, I think this one thing to acknowledge, I think it was said before, but it always interesting to remember about how this is a structural problem, and that that it's built in the system that we have right now. And so it is a systemic problem, because right now we live in a society that, as Lamia was saying, have a way of thinking that is binary. So it's always put things apart. So it is women and men, nature and culture, nature and city, bad and good and evil. It always, we can go for like hours just talking about these different binary structures that our system upholds itself. So when we talk about dissident people that are out of this binary thought, it always, I see that there is a difficulty to acknowledge it. And actually, I believe that a lot of the answers that we search right now in the different agendas that we have around human rights, climate change, nature, we can find a lot of the answers when you go out of this binary thought and start thinking that things are not only on this spectrum. And yeah, because right now we still live a lot of the agenda that we have are structured in this binarism. And about the challenges that I face, I think like in the movements that I work, first, like just being a dissident body is already like a challenge, because you're all the time, I face like daily violences of not having my pronouns and my social name respected. And these already put us in a place of being scared of like going out. And as Jorge say, when you're even talking about sexuality, we are also scared, because we don't know how people will take it. We don't know what are the prejudices that we will face. And right now, one very practical problem that I have is I will be part of the COP26, so the climate change conference, and I still don't know if I will be able to have my social name on my badge. This is so simple, but it takes my sleep, because I keep thinking that I won't have my name respected, and therefore my identity will not be respected, and I will have to face this violence. Because I went to a COP in Madrid, but at that time I still recognize myself as a cisgender woman. And I think another challenge that we have is actually, even though we acknowledge the importance of intersection, right now, most of the agendas, they are very focused on specific issues and have a lot of problems in doing this intersection. If we're talking about the climate agenda, that is still have trouble to dialogue with the nature and biodiversity agenda that have so much in common, that is like the connection between them are so obvious. And so I really believe that when we're talking, this is also like a barrier to go further in those intersectional discussions and understand how all these problems, they are connected and they have to be addressed in also an intersection approach. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thank you, Gabby. Jorge, I'll give you the floor and for the final intervention.
Thank you. Something that makes me scared is realizing that history is not really progressive, but it's cyclical. So right now here in Ecuador, we are facing a new president that is, and his whole family that has openly, talked about against the LGBTIQ community. And it really brings me back into thinking probably what happened in Brazil, you know, with Jair Bolsonaro, which is openly and very, very violent, right? And thinking what's happening in Bangladesh with what Lamia is telling us, which is really heartbreaking, thinking that up to now, in this moment of our history, we still have those very disturbing facts about our rights. It's a really scared. So in that regard, something that we focused is on decolonizing our bodies and decolonizing our territories, because they are intertwined. You know, if we are not able to decide over our bodies, our main territory, the primal territory, you know, that means that the state is literally deciding for us. And that's what happens, you know, when in the Amazon here, where indigenous communities are forced to accept extractivism, you know, as a way of living, even if they don't want to. The same thing happens with our bodies when the state tells us how we can look, how we can dress, you know, what names we can actually put on ourselves, if we are queer, if we want to be trans or not. So that is very important and core into going into a next phase, you know, actually being able to secure our existence into the next phase era, or hopefully it will be the Ecocene that we are as a community, as a humanity are going to. So here right now, one of the main events is women's rights and abortion, pro-choice, the legalization of pro-choice. And recently, just 9 months ago, there was a big announcement, because finally, after decades, abortion after violation was approved. So it really is really disturbing as well, thinking that many children, you know, because these are girls that had, you know, they were raped and they have to carry a pregnancy, an unwanted pregnancy. And that just happened here in Ecuador. So as a group, Yes Unidos, we openly manifested that we support pro-choice, because again, being able to defend and decide over our primal territories and any other territory, the places we live, is core into decolonizing and going into a next era where we can actually be completely completely own our resources, our territories, and our decisions.
Great, thank you so much for being with us. I think what I'm hearing a lot is, and what I have seen and faced is, we do live through many difficult challenges, and some more than others, especially if you add the different lenses of intersectionality. I think our identities yet have a very powerful power in them, in putting them forward. It challenges colonial structures, it challenges binary thinking, it challenges capitalist system. I think if the more we can speak out, the more our voices are heard, the more we have spaces around decision making, I think there's great emancipatory power in exposing, in being proud of our identities and exploring those together as well as a society. I'm sure there's many people who identify as a binary, but yet might be somewhere else on the spectrum. I think there's a lot of positive power in sharing the diversity of identities, the diversity of nature, the diversity of thought and background. I think that's one of the double-edged swords. I think it disturbs a lot of the system and the power in place, but I think it offers a great path forward as well. So on that note, I want to thank all of you, all three of you, for joining us today. We will close off. So I also want to thank everybody, all the participants who joined this session of the Queer Youth Dialogues. Remember, this is a year-long campaign, so we hope you continue to join us on the next sessions, and that together we can continue to build a stronger global youth movement for LGBTIQ human rights with more resources, support, and power. So you can follow our social media channels for more information. If you're a young person, sign up to the Queer Youth Network's mailing list via the website, and it should be shared in the chat just now. So once again, thank you everybody for sharing your insights, for sharing your stories, struggles, challenges, and hope for the future. I hope that everybody also appreciated listening to this. Thank you so much.